Meanwhile, over in the UK, Defence Minister John Healey said Iranian missile and drone strikes came within a few hundred metres of a group of British military personnel in Bahrain. He added that 2 missiles were fired in the direction of Cyprus, where the UK has bases. Healey said he does not believe that the missiles targeted Cyprus, but described the incident as, I quote, an example of how there is a very real and rising threat from a regime that is lashing out widely across the region. Well, for more on this development, we can cross to our correspondent in London, Benedicte Paviot. Thank you very much for being with us. So, as I mentioned, UK assets attacked in the Middle East. Can you tell us some more about this?
Yes, there is clearly concern for British civilians in the Middle East, but also there is great concern from the British government about military UK assets in the Middle East. So as you were saying, it's in fact Defence Secretary John Healey who is doing the media rounds today, appropriately, and he revealed that indeed 2 missiles from Iran were fired in what he called the direction of Cyprus, where the UK clearly has military bases. He actually added that the government didn't believe that the Iranians were targeting the bases intentionally, interestingly, but he said, quote, it shows how indiscriminate the Iranian retaliation to Saturday's US-Israeli strikes was. He also said, as you mentioned, that the 300 UK military personnel were actually really close. They were within some yards of where the asset was hit, certainly in Bahrain. And he said that, reiterated that very much British troops, military assets, but also British civilians in the Middle East are being put at serious risk from what he called these indiscriminate attacks by Iran, and that protecting both was obviously a British priority. And what's interesting about those revelations, they come a day after Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, said that he had ordered that UK planes in the sky over the Middle East be flown on defensive operations to protect the UK's allies. And Mr. Healey also repeated that Prime Minister Keir Starmer's calls to Iran to end these missile strikes and what he called step back from its increasing uncontrolled, indiscriminate attacks in the region and give up, still quoting, its weapons programs. And talking about the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed yesterday during US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran, he said that nobody here would, or very certainly few people, will mourn that death. He said he's more concerned about the repercussions of the attacks on Iran and the wider region. So Keir Starmer is again very clear. The regime, not the people, the regime is utterly abhorrent. They've murdered so many thousands of their own people, crushed the dissent. But interestingly, the Prime Minister revealed that there were 20 potentially lethal attacks on UK soil that were foiled last year. This is totally new. We were not aware of this.
And in view of those revelations, Benedicte, the latest that we heard from the UK position is that it said it would not participate in the strikes. Do you think that's liable to change?
It could change, but for the moment, the position is extremely clear. I would say that Keir Starmer, today, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, was really at pains, despite multiple questions from British journalists, certainly on television and on radio, to point out that the UK had not participated in these strikes done yesterday or indeed today. I would say that the Defence Secretary declined to comment on whether the US-Israeli strikes on Iran were legal. So that poses the question of when Parliament reconvenes on Monday. We've already heard the Foreign Affairs Committee chair talk about the fact that she believed, it was her own opinion, that these strikes were actually in contravention of international law. Of course, I need to also point out the fact that the safety of UK nationals is uppermost very much in the minds of the government here. So they've been appealing across social media and indeed through the UK Foreign Office to advise, remind people against all essential travel to Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar and the UAE, that is British nationals. And indeed, if you are a British national in those countries, the recommendation, indeed the strong advice is you should shelter in place and register your presence with the consular services there. And they say that British nationals, whether resident or there on tourism or business affairs, can actually contact the FCDO 24/7. So a very serious, deteriorating situation that the British government hopes will bring Iran back to the negotiating table.
Benedicte Paviot, thank you very much for your insight there on the latest in the UK.